Standing by the back door, readying for a long walk, I heard a dog barking, followed by the sound of a man shouting. I jammed my feet into my boots and walked across the gravel to the wooden gate to look for the cause of the disturbance. There was no reason for a dog to be nearby. Hello, I'm Chloe Dalton, and I'm here to discuss my book, Raising Hare, which was chosen to be featured on the Queen's Reading Room Book Club. Raising Hare is the true story of an experience I had during lockdown, during the pandemic, when I ended up being the custodian or becoming the custodian of a newborn leveret, a baby hare that had been separated from its mother. And the book is the story of that experience and the story of coexistence between a human and a wild animal. I had no idea that I could write a book. I'm a first-time author. I didn't think of myself in this way at all, and I'd been living alongside the hare for 2 years before I even thought that I might start to write down in words what this experience was or to think of sharing it with other people. And the catalyst for this was when the hare, who by now was fully grown and was living between my house and the wild, and she would roam the fields at night and by day come back and sleep in my house, when she does something rather extraordinary and rather unexpected, which I won't give away because for anyone who might want to read the book, they might enjoy this moment. But something remarkable happens, which shows just how much trust existed between the hare and me. And that's the point at which I thought maybe I should start to tell this story and share it with other people. And that's how the book came into being. And I didn't have reservations about how it would be received. It's not something I really thought about. I didn't really know much about the world of books. I was really captivated by the process of living alongside the hare and writing the story. And I wrote the book with a mother hare fast asleep across the doorway to my office where I was sitting and writing and researching. So it felt like a magical experience, and I was just trying to transmit that experience as simply and as accessibly and as warmly as I could and as truthfully as I could. I did worry about some things. I worried, could I, by writing the book, end up harming the hare population? Might I draw negative attention to the hares in some kind of way? Was it right to share the story of the hare? So I thought about that kind of thing more in context of how much I cared about the hare and that wild population than I really did think about readers. Anyone who's written a book will know that you can't really believe that anyone would wish to read your book. So the fact that people have taken it to their hearts means a great deal to me. The real research was learning to observe. I watched the hare day in, day out for about 3.5 years by the time that the book was finished and came to be published. And I watched her through all seasons, all stages of her life. And I really sort of rediscovered how to look, how to watch, how to think about what I was seeing. It's something that wasn't really part of my day-to-day life. I worked as a foreign policy advisor. I travelled constantly. I was always thinking about the world overseas. And the opportunity to watch very closely an animal that was a wild animal, but that yet was willing to exist alongside a human, meant that a large part of my research was simply learning to slow down and be patient and to be attentive to what was happening with the animal, but also in the nature in which she inhabited. So, of course, I had to do some actual other research. Luckily, I had spent those first 2 years before I knew I was going to be writing the book, reading everything I could about hares, for the simple reason that I wanted to know how to look after her as best as I could, because my overriding feeling throughout the process was that this was not a pet. This was a wild animal. She didn't belong to me. My job was to simply help her survive if I could so that she could return to the wild. But I read all sorts of things. I read accounts written by huntsmen about hares going back hundreds of years. I read poetry by poets like William Cooper, who kept hares and, of course, wrote the famous poem Epitaph on a hare. And then I read, scientific journals and really anything I could get my hands on, because there was this incredible contrast between what we say about hares and think about hares the idea of a hare being a harebrained creature or a harebrained scheme being a bad idea. The idea in Shakespeare that hares are an emblem of cowardliness. It's a kind of common theme in most cultures, the place that hares occupy in legend and folklore. And there was this contrast between what I could see of this beautiful, elegant, resilient, peaceful and curious animal and the way we've tended to depict and actually persecute hares. So some of my research was also driven by a desire to try to account for that stark contrast that I began to observe and that started to fuel my desire to try to tell an account of a hare as I had observed it to truly be. I had no expectations. I thought that the experience would last just a couple of hours at most. I describe in the book my uncertainty that I'd done the right thing. Of course, I make a point of telling people, hares aren't pets. They don't belong in human homes. I address in the book my doubt about whether I'd done the right thing by intervening in the life of the hare. But I had this idea at the beginning that I would simply take this animal that seemed to be in danger, that I would take it in for a few hours to my home and I would return it to the wild. And then for reasons that I describe in the book, that became impossible and it became a longer relationship and took a direction that I could never have imagined, whereby giving and allowing the animal to have its freedom meant that she then chose to come and go freely and to coexist, as I say, alongside me. I had no idea what to expect. I struggled to find reliable information about how to look after a hare. I'm not a vet or a scientist. I didn't before this experience have animals in my life. So really, it was a sort of process of learning as I went along, trying to do no harm and being constantly astonished and mesmerized by the grace and calmness and patience of this little hare that tolerated all my efforts to work out how to look after it. We do tend to assume, I think, or certainly I did, that, animals need us. We're sort of used to those relationships with a pet animal. There's a dependency upon us. And certainly, of course, when the leveret was very small, she did depend upon me. I had to work out how to feed her, what to feed her, how to find a little mouth on a tiny, newborn leveret that was smaller than the palm of my hand. Over time, I realized, and particularly as I watched her life develop and how she survived in the wild, that really a hare that is an animal that has never been domesticated is sort of remarkable if we think about it. Most animals in some kind of way have been co-opted by humans and changed by living alongside humans. Hares are still as wild as they were thousands of years ago. So those instincts, that innate understanding of how to care for her own survival was all there. And actually what I needed to do was to not get in the way of that, was to be sure that I didn't restrict or constrain the hare, that I respected her wild nature. And certainly I'm very happy to say that I'm the one that changed. I realized that the hare knew everything that she needed to know for her own survival, as I say in the book, whereas I found everything really in my life changing, my priorities, my understanding of nature, my openness and attentive to nature, and then lots of different other personal changes that flowed from that, including the fact that I've had a chance to write a book. And for me personally, it's so poignant and almost miraculous that an animal that doesn't have vocal cords, that's utterly silent for the most part, helped me personally to find my own voice and to have an opportunity to express my own voice, which means a great deal to me. I didn't have any prior convictions about this. It's not a scenario I ever expected that I would live through. I hadn't, as I said, had animals in my life. So it wasn't that I approached it with some sort of prior set of convictions or ideological approach to nature or to animals. But I could just sense, even from the earliest days, that this animal was wild. It didn't belong in a human home, and that somehow my responsibility was to try to understand as much as possible what how that animal would behave naturally in the wild. But of course, I felt all of those warm responses that we feel towards young animals, to animals. I don't write in the book about loving the hare, but of course I loved the hare. But I think sometimes the best thing we can do for the things and people that we love is to respect their independence and their freedom, and that's what I try to do with this animal. The beautiful thing is that there's a large part of the hare's life that was hidden from me. She wasn't in a cage. She was free to come and go, and therefore a lot of the time she was out in the fields and the woods doing what hares do in the wild, and I never tried to follow her. I didn't put some kind of chip into her or anything that would have made it possible for me to follow her movements. I only observed her when she chose to be in the house and to rest alongside me, and that's the part of her life that I wrote about, really. There were things I tried hard that were almost challenges for me as a writer, to avoid that instinctive assumption that we have that we can interpret what's in the mind of an animal. I tried to respect the limits of my understanding, to think that, in certain circumstances it seemed possible and plausible and fair to assume that she was calm and felt safe because she would fall asleep in my presence. One of the things people say about hares is they don't shut their eyes. That's a sort of old sort of piece of kind of folk lore about hares. But of course, she would absolutely shut her eyes and fall asleep and sleep for hours alongside me. But I would always try to say, to think, hard about the words that I would choose, so that I didn't anthropomorphize her or impose my emotions on her. So it's more that kind of thing, while recognizing that I had a window into the life of a hare, but I still haven't got to the bottom of the nature of a hare, and that's just as it should be and is rather beautiful, I think, that there are some parts of life and nature that are still beyond our understanding. I'm not an expert. In the book, I don't set myself up to be an expert on really these difficult questions of how we balance the need for food security and enough space for housing and all of these other things that we have to take into account with the need to conserve the environment. But I did notice how it's possible to make small adjustments at an individual and personal level that can have a big impact. And I describe in the book efforts that I was involved in to plant more hedges, to create field margins in the area where these hares live, so that they could raise their young in a greater degree of safety or have access to more varied food sources. And I saw how that was good for the hares, but also good for the entire ecosystem, of which hares are just an important part, and it made me sort of hopeful. We are inundated with bad news, reasons to worry, reasons to feel uncertain and fearful about the future. And I can't hang too much on just one experience, but it gave me a sense that all is not lost. That we can find better ways to coexist with nature and with each other, and that a landscape that's safer for hares will be better for all of us and more beautiful for all of us. And I would love more people to have the chance to see hares. And it is sad and distressing that the population of hares in the UK has declined by roughly 85% in little more than a century, which is really sort of astonishing. If that had happened to us, we would consider that we were really on the verge of not existing anymore. And so that sort of sense that hares are this emblem of the British landscape, and that more people should be able to share in that mystery of seeing them in the wild, is something that I feel quite strongly about, and I am hopeful about. I was one of those people who sought out exciting, exotic, novel experiences that often, for me, involved travel, going to far-flung places and learning about other cultures. And I'm so grateful to have had that opportunity. But this whole experience did make me see the beauty of our landscape here in the UK in a completely different light. It made me think about and question and reevaluate, that sense of what a good life is, what a life of meaning and purpose is, and how that can really often involve being far more connected to a community and to a patch of land than perhaps I was living in London and travelling all the time. And it really opened my eyes to the beauty and interest that can be found just around us, if we're lucky. Sometimes we have to go a little way to look for it, but that sort of sense of that there's beauty in the commonplace. And if I found myself asking, so much interest and wonder and peace and healing in an animal that is as small in some respects and is as insignificant as it's sometimes regarded to be as a hare, then there must be so much more that I have yet to discover in nature and in the world and in myself and in that kind of beautiful bond between humans and animals. So yes, I describe in the book, almost a second childhood where I, for the sake of researching the book and working out how to express and how to describe the landscape, I found myself trying to learn, from scratch about grass and flowers and crops and trees and that cycle of life, and admitting my ignorance and allowing my curiosity to just play was a wonderful and quite liberating experience. I describe in the book my feeble attempts to sort of remember what a rainbow is and how a rainbow is formed, and it made me sort of feel that joy again of realizing that in a world in which sometimes it feels like everything is professionalized, and if you're not an expert, you can't it's too late to start, that nature is there waiting for all of us at whichever stage of our lives we are and in whichever way we choose or are able to access it and enjoy it. And I embrace that, and that overriding feeling that the hare gave me was that sense of sort of wonder and rediscovery and possibility of change at any point in life. The pace of the book, the style, the way I wrote the story was really determined by the hare herself, by the nature of a hare, even though they're these incredibly, speedy animals, the fastest land mammal in the UK and in most of Europe. The daily life of a hare is actually very calm, very quiet, very steady. It's made up of drowsing and lying in the sun until night falls and it's safe for them to run again. So really I tried to write the book in a way that was most in keeping with the nature of the hare herself. The beauty of a book is that it's for each reader to feel like they're the only reader of a book. And when I read, that's how I feel. I love that sense of discovering a book. But I would be very happy if people took away a sense of hope, that there is still time to change course on some of the issues that worry us, that it's possible, as I did, to find a change, a new path in life and new opportunity and new sense of self at any point in your life. And that, there is, when all else fails, there is that peace and comfort and renewal in nature that is, so resilient, so forgiving somehow, despite all of our unfortunate, the harm we cause. And that's what I would like readers to take away, a sense of warmth and hope and possibility. Well, at the moment, I'm writing my next book. It's a wonderful outcome of the interest that readers have had in Raising Hare, that I have the chance to write again, and I grabbed it with both hands. So I'm working on a book that's called Pet. It picks up where Raising Hare leaves off. It deals with a piece of unfinished business I had arising out of the book, which is this feeling I had that the hare wasn't a pet, and I'm looking in more detail at that beautiful relationship between humans and animals in our homes, but also the impact on animals in the wild. Raising Hare is available in bookstores and should be available in your local library, and you can subscribe to the Queen's Reading Room for more bookish content.